Good morning, everyone. Today we're going to start chapter 12 and we will be talking about parking and how can we know how many spots that we really need for any facility. So we're going to start with a little bit of introduction and then we're going to move towards the part what do we mean by parking generation and the supplies needs, and also we can do some parking studies and characteristics, and eventually we're going to finish the chapter with designing aspects of parking facilities. So as we all know that every person typically starts and ends their trip as a pedestrian after you park. So again, believe it or not, you would start your trip as a pedestrian. You would walk from your house or from your office or from your school. You would walk for some distance until you reach your car, and then you would drive. You park your car to your destination, and then eventually you would walk again. So, but at the beginning of each trip and the end of each trip, it really ends with parking. So for land to be productive or productively used, it must be accessible. I cannot have a space or again event center or a stadium without having a parking, and which is basically is gonna lead to the accessibility. If that event center or that hospital or this school doesn't have accessibility point or doesn't have a parking spots, it's gonna be very hard to motivate people to come and use this facility. So, and although again there are public transportation that can be a major part of providing that type of accessibility in dense urban areas, but still accessibility really depends on the supply, convenience, and cost of the parking facilities. In so many cases, if the parking is expensive, that may demotivate people to come and park here, and they would look for maybe other places to park, or even just cancel the plan and look for another place that has less expensive parking. Major activity centers like what we see in this like any activity center or the theaters, they always again look for they have to have a big parking spots, from regional shoppings to sports facilities, even to airports. All they really depend on significant parking supply in order to provide site accessibility. If I do not have a good parking supply facility, again I'm indirectly demotivating people to come and invest their time and money in these places. So without that supply, these facilities couldn't be operate profitably over a substantial period of time. In fact, in so many cases, we could see as a traffic engineer that the economic survival of most of these activity centers is directly related to parking and other forms of access. So in general, if there is no access, if there is no accessibility, if there is no motivation that you can park your car easily and then walk for a very short distance to your destination, people would tend to change their plans or look for another places. So what's the goal here? So the goal as a traffic engineer, how can we help in this situation, is to determine how many spaces are required for a particular development and where they should be located. It's not just how many spaces, we also have to decide where are they going to be located. I cannot have a parking spot couple miles away from a stadium, for example, or a mile away from a hospital. I cannot afford this. So as a traffic engineer, it's not just deciding how many spaces you need to generate, it's also where they should be located. So the need for a parking spaces really has to depend on so many factors. The very first one is the type and the size of the land use. So if I have a big land use like a hospital, the parking supply has to be way bigger than a small office, for example. Also, it depends on the general density of the development environment. Am I living in a big city, urban city? Therefore, I'm expecting more customers and therefore I need more spacing when it comes to parking spots. Or am I living in a very small town that I'm not having that much of development around me and therefore I'm not expecting that many people to come and therefore parking spots should be much lower. Also, the need for parking spaces depend on the amount and quality of public transportation access availability. So, if I have a good accessibility to public transportation, this may lower the need for a parking spots. So, what do I mean by parking generation? So, the reference here, I'm using the ITE parking generation definition, which is basically that definition really try to relate the maximum observed number of occupied parking spaces to one of the fundamental variables that is used as a surrogate for the size or activity level of that land use involved. So once I know this, once now I make a connection between the size or the activity level of that area, then I'll be able to relate that to what would be the maximum expected number of parking spots needed to serve this area. This is here a table, table 12.1 in your textbook, that shows a typical parking generation specification units. So for example, if I pick on the first land use type, which is single family residential, typically we would ask for what would be the parking related unit. The parking related unit would be per dwelling unit, or the alternative would be per dwelling unit with range by number of bedrooms. If I ask for a shopping center, the parking related unit should be per 1000 GLA, 1000 square feet GLA. A GLA is the gross leasable area right here. So every 1000 square feet gross leasable area, I should have certain amount of parking spots. So this is here, we're starting to look at the parking related unit. What would be the appropriate unit to be used? Same thing for a bank, for example, or even a restaurant. The restaurant is kind of interesting. So for the restaurant, the parking related unit, the preferred one is per seat. So if I have 100 seats in the restaurant, again, this would be a good parking related unit for generation of the parking spots. The alternative would be per 1000 square feet GLA or GFA. Here's gross floor area rather than gross leasable area. So here in table 12.2, it's a very good table that gives you a national perspective of the number of parking spots that you need. But again, the golden rule, if it's always preferable to have base projection of parking needs on a locally calibrated values rather than using the national norms. So if it happened to be that you're opening a brand new event center or a hospital or an office, you would try to look for something similar to your business at the same area, and that will give you a good starting point. In case if you do not, or you're doing something brand new and it's not done before in the city, then you may be able to use this table here to give you an indication what would be the required number of parking spots. So for example, let's pick on the office, and here in this table, by the way, it gives you two different estimates of the parking spots needed. The very first one is, for example, let's pick on the office. Here is give you the average rate per 1000 square feet. So the office, it tells you that you need to have 2.84 parking spots for every 1000 square feet GFA, which stands for gross floor area. So that's one way of doing it, which is again is gonna be simply the 2.84 times how many thousand square feet of GFA. Or you also can use this equation here. This equation was built on, these are the number of studies that was used to develop this equation, and this is the R squared, the precision of this equation as well. So if you have, again, the x here is the unit. So if you have, for example, 25,000 GFA, so how many thousand is in there is 25. So the 25 times 2.51 plus 27. That's gonna give you how many parking spots you will need. Let's have an example here. A small office building consisting of 25,000 square feet of office space. What's the peak parking load expected to be at this facility? So if you go back to table 12.2, for office building, the average peak parking occupancy is what? Is 2.84 per thousand square feet of building area. Or in this case, it's gonna be 25, which is 25,000 times 2.84, and that would be the number of parking spaces. A more realistic or a more precise estimate might be obtained using the equation related to the facility area, and that would be 2.51 x plus 27. That x here is gonna be the 25,000 square feet is gonna be 25 times 1,000. The 1,000 again is outside. This is the unit, so it's gonna be 2.51 times 25 plus 27, and that would be 90 spaces. So if you used just the unit 2.84 per 1,000 square feet times 25, you can get 71 parking spaces needed. If you use the equation that was developed after a few hundreds of studies, now it's telling you that you need to have 90 spaces. So there is a significant range to the engineer to pick from 71 all the way to 90 parking spaces needed. Thus, although again these general guidelines can provide some insight into the parking needs, it's very important to do a localized studies of parking generation to have a bigger judgment or a more precise judgment compared to just using national norms. Another parking generation study that was done in 1998, that study was very comprehensive. It basically included over 400 shopping centers were surveyed in this study. The number of spaces provided per 1,000 square feet of gross leasable area (GLA) was used, and as you could see here, the centers are categorized by two things. The very first thing is the total size, which is in GLA, and the percentage of total number of GLA occupied by movie houses, restaurants, or other entertainment uses. So it's very interesting here in this study that they are not just depending on the GLA, they are also saying that if the percentage of the center is occupied by movie houses or restaurants, then the parking generation or the parking supply has to increase. So let's take a look at the table here and see if this is really applies. So this is table 12.3, and here we're saying, for example, let's pick on center size equal to 400,000 GLA. So it's gonna be here, and now we're not just depending on GLA, we're also depending on the percentage usage of movie houses, restaurant, and other entertainment. So if it's just 0%, let's assume that this center is not gonna have any entertainment facility. It's just gonna be, again, anything else but movie houses, restaurants, or entertainment. Then we need to have, this is here, four spots for every 1,000 square feet of gross leasable area. Once now I move from 0 to 5 to 10 to 15 to 20%, now when I reach 20%, so what I'm saying is if I have 20% of the size of the center is occupied by movie houses and restaurants and any other entertainment, now I need to have 4.3 parking spots for every 1,000 GLA. The difference, again, as you can see all the time, it starts from, for example, here if we have a huge center that has, for example, 2.5 million GLA, so if I have nothing of entertainment activities, it's 4.5 times every 1,000 square feet of GLA, while if it's 20% it's 4.8. Huge difference. Again, here you may think it's just 0.3 difference, but then by the time how many thousands you are having, this gonna make a huge difference in the number of parking spots that need to be generated. In the same study, again, it came up with guidelines that they were established such that the 20th peak parking hour of the year is accommodated. So we're not just using the worst hour of the year, we're only using the 20th. So the 20th peak parking hour of the year was accommodated. That means that there are only 19 hours of the year when the parking demand would exceed the recommended value. When it comes to movie theaters and restaurants and other entertainment facilities that occupy more than 20% of the GLA, shared parking approach is really recommended. And again, this is something else outside the scope of this topic. But now, once we have more than 20% of entertainment, now we need really to go for further demand, more demand of parking spots to be handling this amount of people that they are going to be using movie houses and restaurants and other entertainment. So let's now have an example based on this table right here. Let's say I'm going to have new regional shopping center with 1 million square feet of GLA is to be built. And it was given to you that is anticipated that about 15% of the GLA will be occupied by movie theaters, restaurants, and other entertainment. And the question for you as a traffic engineer is, how many parking spaces should be provided for this center? So if I have 1 million square feet, so 1 million square feet is gonna be here, the last line. This is applicable for any center size from 600,000 square feet of GLA all the way to 2.5. So we're right here, and now it was given to us that 15% is going to be used for entertainment purposes, so it's going to be this column here. So this is the number that I need to use, 4.65. So what I need is 4.65 parking spots for every 1,000 square feet. And since this shopping center is going to have 1 million square feet of GLA, that means this number here is including 1,000 of 1,000 square feet. So it's 4.65 times 1,000. So it's 1,000 square feet. So 4.65 times 1,000. So I need 4,650 parking spaces. So again, a huge number. Let's assume that instead of having 15%, I'm gonna have 0%. So if it's 0%, it's just gonna be 4.5 times 1,000. So I'm gonna have 4,500 parking spots compared to 4,650. So the difference is about 150 parking spaces, and those 150 parking spaces again are big money. So if you are not having that amount of entertainment, you can drop it down by less than 150 parking spots compared to this case here. Another parameter that we tend to be interested to obtain is the peak. The peak parking demand can be estimated as using this equation here. So D is the parking demand, which is number of spaces, parking spots. N, this is the size of activity measured in appropriate units, either floor area, employment, dwelling units, and we're gonna have an example in a second. And then we're having K. K is the portion of destinations that occur at any one time. R is the person destination per day. Person destinations per day. P is the proportion of people arriving by a car. So many cases when it comes to stadiums or activity centers, so many people may come with buses or with other means of transportation. So we need to know what's the proportion of the people that they will be arriving by their own cars. O, this is the average auto occupancy. So how many people typically come within one car? This is how many people. Again, this is the occupancy definition. all the way to PR. PR is the proportion of persons with primary destination at the designated study location. This is their primary destination. They are not just going to the stadium, or they are not going to the activity center. This is their primary destination. It happened to be that they park their cars at the same parking spot for this center or for this stadium. So let's have an example here to know how can we obtain this number. So let's say we're having 400,000 square feet retail shopping center in the heart of a central business district, which we could typically call it CBD. The following estimates have been made. So those again has to be already made before you are asked to generate the number of parking spots during the peak hour or the peak demand. So the first thing is where you were told that approximately 40% of all shoppers area in the central business district for other reasons are again 40%. That means PR 60% are coming for this reason in particular. So 40% again are just coming for other reasons. They are coming to the central business district to visit friends who live in downtown, to do any other things. But 60% are coming for shopping. Also, approximately I'm having 70% of the shoppers travel to the retail center by automobile. That means again 70% are traveling by their own cars. So P is 7.7. That means 30% are coming by other means. Another piece of information that you need to know is approximate total activity at the center is estimated to be 45 person destinations per 1,000 square feet of gross leasable area, of which 20% occur during the peak parking accumulation period. So if you look at the definition that we just made, that means that R is 45. This is again 45 person destinations per 1,000 square feet GLA, and 20% occur during the peak parking accumulation period. So 20% of the people come at that period in particular, and 80% else they come other times. So K is 0.2. And then the average auto occupancy of travelers to the shopping center is 1.5 persons per car. So every car that arrives at the shopping center is having on average 1.5 persons. The last thing here also that you need to know is because the unit size is 1,000 square feet of gross leasable area, then N, this is N, the number of thousands. So the number of thousands is 400 because I have 400,000 square feet, which is the area. So now I can get the D, the number of parking spaces. Basically the N is 400 times 45 times 0.2 times 0.7 times 0.6, which are already defined, over 1.5, and therefore I can estimate that the number of spaces during this activity peak hour we will need 1008 parking spaces. This is really equivalent to, if you divide this 1008 over 400,000, then I'm saying I need 2.52 spaces per 1000 square feet of GLA. It's 1000 square feet. Now we're moving to another definition here, or another regulation that we need to keep in mind while we're trying to estimate the number of parking spots, is what we call zoning regulation. Sometimes you're done with the design, you estimated the precise number of the parking spots that you need to have for this certain facility, but you also have to satisfy the zoning regulations. Zoning regulations, those are regulations that control parking supply for significant developments, is generally maintained through zoning requirements. Any city, any municipality is going to have its own zoning requirements. Local zoning requirements generally specify the minimum number of parking spaces. It's not gonna limit the number of parking spaces if you want to have much more than what's needed, you're more than welcome to do it. But again, it's not going to be economically efficient. But the city or the local governments, they will be asking you for a minimum number of parking spaces that must be provided for developments of any specified type and size. So the zoning regulation also often specify the need of handicapped parking and typically sets for you the minimum standards for loading zones. So it's not just about the regular parking spots. Any local agency or any local transportation agency would set the minimum handicapped parking spots for any facility. So here we are having table 12.4 to give you some of the recommended parking space zoning requirements in suburban settings. For example, if you have a single family, for a single family, the unit is dwelling unit, and we are recommending to have peak parking demand two spots in the peak parking demand. And when it comes to the recommended zoning requirements is also 2. Let's pick on hospitals. So if I have now medical treatments hospital, the regular unit that we related to parking need is the number of beds, and the peak parking demand is 2.5. This is the peak parking demand, while the recommended zoning requirements, it's the higher of 2.7 or 0.33 plus 0.4 over number of employees plus 0.2 number of outpatient plus 0.25 over the staff physician. So this is here again to give you an idea that we are really here trying to connect the zoning or minimum zoning requirements to the number of employees, number of outpatients, and the number of staff physicians who are working at the facility. Same thing when it comes to business offices. So for any general office which is less than 30,000 square feet, the typically unit again is 1,000 GFA, 1,000 square feet GFA, and the parking demand at the peak time is 3, while when it comes to the recommended zoning requirement, it ranges, it's about 4 in this case. One of the things that I also want to mention here, that the recommended zoning requirements would be significantly reduced in an urban area with good transit access. So if it's an urban area with a good transit access, that means people are having the accessibility to use public transportations much more than other places, and therefore those regulations and requirements are going to be much less. Another good source for zoning regulations would be the Institute of Traffic Engineers, which really recommend you the following minimum standards for provision of handicapped spaces. So when it comes to offices, they are recommending to have 0.02 spaces per 1,000 square feet GFA. When it comes to banks, typically it's 1 to 2 spaces per bank. So every bank has to have at least 1 to 2 handicapped spots at their parking facility. When it comes to restaurants, it's 0.3 spaces per 1,000 square feet GFA. Until we reach retails, again, if it's less than 500,000 square feet, then it's 0.07 spaces per 1,000 square feet of GFA. If it's more than 500,000 square feet, then it's 0.06. Why? Because now, if it's more than 500,000, that means we don't want to be super conservative, or we don't want to have too many spaces for handicap that they're not going to be used, and therefore the number here, as you can see, is even less because now the area is high. So the area is so high, then if we have this area is going to be high, and therefore if a high number times a high coefficient is going to give you too much of handicapped spaces that may not be used efficiently, and therefore the coefficient would go lower if the area is way higher. In all cases, as I said before, there is an effective minimum of 1 handicapped space. You have to have at least 1 handicapped space for any facility. You cannot have less than that. At least one handicapped space, no matter what the area or what the facility is. Now we're gonna shift gears and talk more about parking studies and some of the characteristics that is connected to the subject of parking and parking studies and parking spots. The first question that we always ask when it comes to designing parking facility is proximity, which translated in a layman language to this question: how far will parkers are willing to walk? Maximum walking distances that parkers will tolerate really varies, believe it or not, with the trip purpose and the urban area size. So in general, the drivers or the parkers will be tolerable walking distance are longer for work trips than for other type of trip. For example, again, if you are working, you would sacrifice walking for half a mile even, or 0.75 miles to get to your work. Perhaps because of the, again, relatively long duration involved. But when it comes to other purposes like a shopping center or a theater, you would like to have it, again, as close as possible. You are not willing to walk that much. The proximity has to be very close to the facility itself to think of this location as a good place to go to. Longer walking distances are typically tolerated for off-street parking spaces as opposed to on-street. So this is here a very interesting observation that we are willing, as drivers, we typically are willing to walk for longer distances if I'm gonna park my car on an off-street parking. For example, again, if there is a big facility, several floors are designated for parking, off-street parking, parkers tend to be willing to walk a little bit longer to keep their car in a safer place, which is an off-street parking, compared to just leaving the car on the street. As the urban area population increases, also there is a tendency that longer walking distances are experienced. So if you are in a big city, you are expected to park your car somewhere and you would be walking a longer distance to get to your work or to get to your destination, compared to smaller cities or smaller towns where you are really expected to park and walk very short distance and get to your destination. So the willingness changes between big city, and everyone would have the understanding that it's very hard to be very close to your work location or to be close to a stadium, and therefore the understanding or the culture of a longer walking time or distance would be accepted at urbanized area compared to more of a small towns. So the question again still continue: how far will the parkers walk? Very interesting question, and we need to answer it, because if we do not know the answer, we will not be able to build the parking facility in the right location. Because remember, when it comes to parking facilities, it's all about two things. The very first issue is the number of spaces or number of parking spots, and then how far it should be, where is the location of the parking facilities. So the willingness for parkers to walk certain distances, either to or from their destination to their car, must be well understood as a traffic engineers, because it's definitely is going to have a significant influence over where parking capacity must be provided. So for example, let's take a look at this table here. This table 12.5, central business district walking distances to parking space. So this is here the distance of people walking to the parking or leaving the parking spot going to their destination, and this is here the percentage of walking this distance or further. What's the amount of percentage of people that they will be willing to walk this distance? So let's start with 0. That means, again, you just park and you will walk maybe for just 10 to 15 feet, and you will be inside that means 100% of the people would love that. And that's why we're having 100% who can do it. Now, how about if I have to walk 1,000 feet or 0.19 miles? Once now we are walking that 0.19 miles or 1,000 feet, now we are having 27% of people are willing to walk this distance. Or the range, you will have 17 to 37%. When it comes to now, how about more than 5,000 feet? So it's almost like a mile. How many people are willing to walk for a mile to park their car and then go to their destination? That's 1%, and the range is really 0 to 2. So in some cases, no one was willing to do it, and the best case scenario, they had 2% of the correspondents to this survey, they were willing to walk that mile. So even in cities of a large population, which is somewhere between 1 to 2 millions, 75% of drivers park within a quarter mile for their final destination. The question here, where did I come up with this number? Again, if you look at again, this is here the 0.25 miles, so somewhere between 0.19 and 0.28, which is gonna be closer to the 0.2 miles. You have 27% people are willing to walk more than 0.25 miles. That means there are 75% of the people, they would be parking their cars and walking less than 0.25 miles to their destination. So even in bigger cities, you still can have the same trend that people they just don't want to walk. They like to be accessible to their destination within 0.25 miles, and this is something need to be considered by transportation and traffic engineers while they are developing plans on where to locate the parking facility. In urban regions of over 10 million population, the average walking distance to parking spaces is approximately 900 feet. This is here on average. Another study showed this graph right here. So let's take a look at it and see what are we seeing here. So this is urbanized area population in thousands. So this is here 10,000, 100,000, 1 million, and this is 10 millions. So even the 10 millions, if you go all the way up, this is the 900 that I was talking about, approximately 900 feet. So again, on average, this is the average walking distance that any driver is willing to do to reach their parking facility and leave it there and go to their destination. But we need always to be reminded, it's not just about the distance. You always have to know what's the trip purpose. If the trip purpose and the trip duration also affect the walking distances, drivers are willing to accommodate. For example, when it comes to shopping or other trips where things must be carried, shorter walking distances are desired. So if you're going to a Walmart, you don't want to be walking for 900 feet or like 0.1 miles to reach your car. So if there is something that is a place that you would know that you are doing your shopping and then you would holding something or carrying something, definitely you need to be even closer. So it's not just about a certain number, like here we're saying 900 feet and you stop right there. As a traffic engineer, you also need to be aware of what's the trip purpose. If you are designing a parking facility for a Walmart, for example, you need to be super close. If you are doing a movie theater, maybe it's a little bit, people are willing to walk a little bit longer compared to a shopping facility. So it always depends on the trip purpose and the trip duration as well. For example, what do I mean by trip duration? If you are doing or if you are driving for 2 hours to reach certain destination, then you would be willing to park your car somewhere, and I think you would have more willingness to walk a little bit longer compared to if you are doing a daily trip to your work. So the trip duration, again, the trip itself is taking 10-15 minutes to reach to your work. you are not willing to walk for another 5 to 10 minutes, which is again to get you there in within 0.1 miles to the work. So you are not really willing to walk that much if the duration of the trip itself wasn't that long. So these are the two factors that need to be included in your analysis. Something else that we tend to do as traffic engineers while we're thinking of parking studies are parking inventories. So inventories typically include observations of number of parking spaces and their location, the time restrictions on use of parking spaces, as well as the type of parking facilities. So why we do parking inventories? Because now once we are done with this study, typically so many businesses, they would come back to us and ask, well, we're having problems with parking spots. So many people, they are complaining that they do not have enough spots. We do not have enough spots for our parking facility. What should we do? And therefore, you would go as a traffic engineer and you would do that parking inventory. We need to observe how many parking spots do this business have. How about the location? Is the location is far away from the business itself or not? Maybe that's the reason. The people are complaining because it might be far away. The time restriction. When I go and park at this location, am I having restriction to park there only for an hour or maybe 2 max? Therefore, people are not going to be happy about it, or you may need to change this restriction a little bit. The type of parking facility as well. This is something to be considered. Most parking inventory data are collected manually. If you are asking me how are we doing this, it's going to be pretty much manually done. So we need to observe canvassing an area on foot, counting and noting the curb spaces and applicable time restrictions. Also, during this inventory, we need to be recording the location of the parking spot, the type, the capacity of off-street parking facilities. In some areas now with technology, they are using the intelligent transportation system to help them doing this parking inventory. The way to do this by again enhancing the quantity of information available and the ease of accessing using, for example, like in the northeast part of the country, they are using Easy Pass. So this Easy Pass to assess the fees. So instead of being stopped at every single toll road, now they have a card, and this card is gonna be scanned if they are passing through certain toll roads, and then they will know that they pass through this place, and therefore there will be another places or electronic tags to scan them when they are parking. Same with the same card. So this easy pass or easy card would be used for assessing fees of the toll road as well as parking facilities. So if I have the system, now I don't need to do parking inventory manually, because now I have the full record of the people that they park there and how long did they stay there. Another local example here, like Dallas-Fort Worth Airport. Dallas-Fort Worth Airport in Dallas, they do have the system where when you get to the airport, you will get a ticket, and this ticket will have your information and the time that you checked in, and by the time you get back, it's gonna calculate the difference in the time, and therefore it's gonna assess the fee. So based on the fee, we can go back to these records and assess the time that you stayed there and how many people they were occupying the parking facility, and so on and so forth. This is here an example of how can we do the parking inventory manually. So this is the study areas. We typically map it, and then we proceed in a systematic fashion. So you have to map it, and there's several ways of doing it. For example, again, we can map it this way, or we can map it as an area. So it's either block and curb face numbering system, or we can have a parking facility numbering like this, and we keep going back and forth to the same area every 15 minutes, observe if there is a car parked at the same spot If it's the same car, we would now keep counting the time that was there to use it for other parameters that we will be discussing it later on. Part of the parking inventory also where curb spaces are not clearly marked. This is an issue. So when curb spaces are not clearly marked, curb lengths are used to estimate the number of available spaces using the following guidelines. So if I have a parallel parking, I'm gonna use 23 feet per stall. If I have an angle parking, I'm gonna use 12 feet per stall. If I have 90 degrees angle parking, that means I'm gonna use 9.5 feet per stall. What does that again mean? For in so many cases, if you go to any parking facilities, you cannot see, for example here, the lining. For let's say these are the parking areas. So when you do your parking inventory, you would know that there is one space, second, and third. Now, what I mean by this here, the curb spaces are not clearly marked. In so many cases, I cannot really distinguish that there are spaces here, and therefore I wouldn't know how many parking spots am I catching or am I measuring. Therefore, some of the rule of thumbs is you can divide the parking area by using these numbers here. If you are having or if you got to know that it's parallel parking, then you would use 23 feet per stall, and the width is always the same, constant. If it's an angle parking, you would assume it's 12 feet per stall, and if it's 90 degrees angle, definitely would use less, because it's a 90 degrees, which is 9.5 feet per stall. So the total parking supply then can be measured in terms of how many vehicles can be parked during the period of interest within the study area. So to get this is the P. This is the parking supply. So after you do your inventory, now we are interested to see if the parking supply is equivalent to what you saw in your inventory. So to calculate your number, which is P, you need to know, first of all, the summation of NT over D times F. What's this here? N is the number of spaces of a given type and time restriction. T is the time that n spaces of a given type and time restriction are available during the study period, and typically it's done in hours. How many hours? D, this is the average spacing duration during the study period, which is typically again hours per vehicle. So for example, if on average every car staying there for 5 hours, so we're gonna see D is equal to 5 hours per vehicle. F, this is the N sufficiency factor to account for turnover values, which is typically ranges from 0.85 to 0.95, and it also increases as average duration increases. So let's have an example to understand how can we get the parking supply. So the example here tells you that we're having 12-hour study of an area revealed that there are 450 spaces available for full 12 hours. So in the full 12 hours, let's say from noon to midnight, we found out that there are 450 spaces that are available for the full 12 hours. And there are 280 spaces available for 6 hours. And there are 150 spaces available for 7 hours. And 100 spaces available for 5 hours. And also we're given that piece of information that the average parking duration in the area is about 1.4 hours. So on average, every vehicle that park there, it stays for 1.4 hours. The question now is find the parking supply in this study area. So this study area, how many spaces, how many vehicles it can handle. So P is equal to what? Is equal to, and now the summation of all the N, which is 450 times the time. So I have 450 spaces available times 12 hours. I have 280 spaces those 280 spaces are available for 6 hours only. And again, what does that mean? Meaning that, again, there might be some spaces or parking spaces you cannot park more than 6 hours, or they'll be occupied by other means. So we're having 450 available for the entire 12 hours, plus 280 times 6, plus 150 spaces times 7 hours, plus 100 times 5, and all this is over the average parking duration, which is 1.4 hours per vehicle, times the correction factor or insufficiency factor equal to 0.9, and therefore this area can have or can produce or can service 5,548 vehicles. So what does this really number means? That 5,548 vehicles could be parked in the study area over the 11-hour period of the study. It doesn't mean that all the 5,548 vehicles could be parked at the same time. So, and here I need to stress on this fact. It doesn't mean, again, those 5,000 plus cars can be served at the same time. But what I'm saying is, during the study hour, the 12-hour study period, in fact this need to be 12, not 11. So within the 12 hours, this facility can service or can have 5,548 vehicles during 12-hour period. With this, we're done with the first part of this chapter, and we will be talking about more parking statistics and parking spaces calculations in the next lecture. Thank you so much.